Hi, I'm Mike Hildebrand.
And I'm Greg Knoll. Back in the early 1980s, when we started working on the first edition of our book, Hazardous Materials Managing the Incident, the National Fire Protection Association had not yet released its standards on hazardous materials response, and the Occupational Safety and Health Administration final rule was still on the drawing board.
A lot has changed since then, and in the process we've logged over 1 million air miles on our way to work with communities, refineries, chemical plants, and military bases all over the country.
We survived the airline food and knocked down a lot of frequent flyer miles. We also had the opportunity to work with hundreds of firefighters, police officers, medics, hazmat teams, bomb squads, and industrial emergency response teams.
We've learned a lot from those teams, and it's helped us to refine our 8-step process for managing hazardous materials incidents. Now we're collaborating with our friends at Emergency Film Group to bring you the process in 8 easy-to-understand videos. Here's how it works.
First, we'll begin by examining site management and control. Then we'll talk about the process of identifying the problem. In Program 3, we'll cover hazard and risk evaluation. Next, discuss how to select and use protective clothing and equipment, and then how to manage information and resources. Program 6 will review the implementation of response objectives. Then we'll cover decontamination, and finally, how to terminate the incident. But now, let's get back to the subject of this program, site management and control.
If you're going to effectively manage and control a hazmat incident, you must have a systematic and coordinated approach. Before there is an incident, you have to analyze the hazardous materials present in your community or facility and gauge the risk these hazardous materials present. What is the likelihood of an accident? What are the consequences if one occurs? Then plan for a comprehensive and coordinated response to a release or accident.
Your agency is probably very good at handling routine emergencies, but you must recognize that no single agency, public or private, can effectively manage a major hazmat incident by itself. A variety of players will respond to a working hazmat incident. What occurs before the incident during planning will determine how smoothly the emergency response will operate.
To have consistent and effective emergency operations, you have to develop SOPs and train personnel in their application. At the emergency scene, you have to manage the execution of these SOPs. Then, after the incident, you have to critique and improve your operational effectiveness.
In this program, we'll cover procedures for establishing command, guidelines for safe approach and positioning at a hazmat incident, how to establish the isolation perimeter and hazard control zones, and procedures for carrying out protective actions.
An incident is an event that interrupts normal procedures and requires action by emergency responders to prevent or minimize the loss of life and damage to property or to the environment. An incident may become a crisis if the emergency response is not adequate or timely. A crisis can impact your organization's credibility and pose a significant environmental, economic, and legal liability. It also doesn't do much for career development. Safe approach and positioning by initial emergency responders is critical to how the overall incident will be managed. Emergencies that start bad because of poor positioning sometimes stay bad.
About 10 minutes. Sent the shipping papers, going to find out what it is. Don't know now, it's not going to be good though.
If initial responders become contaminated, the operation shifts to decontaminating the responders rather than protecting the public. Approach from uphill and upwind. Highway engineers don't always build roads upwind. So if you don't have this option, use distance and protective equipment to maximize your advantage. Look for physical clues like vapor clouds, spilled material, dead animals, or vegetation. You have to control the site. You cannot begin operations until the hazard area has been identified and the isolation perimeter secured. Isolate people from the problem. Life safety is always the highest priority, but don't get sucked into letting responders charge into rescue operations without following safe operating procedures. The urgency of the situation shouldn't be an excuse to operate unsafely. Establishing command fixes responsibilities on one individual for managing the incident. Command should be strong, direct, and visible, and it should be confirmed so that all responding personnel know who is in charge.
Leaking out of it. We were met by a worker. He said he's not quite sure what it is. He has all his employees evacuated out of the area. None of them had any ill effects.
They don't know whether it's corrosive.
No, they said just some type of toxic material. The workers weren't too specific.
A stationary incident command post should be established.
Well, I think
command must assure that needed personnel and resources are on scene or responding, and if not, request the necessary assistance.
We're going to designate this MHOS command, and I have taken command of the incident this time.
A multi-agency response will place a special burden on command, since there will be the need for communications between the agencies and coordination of functions and personnel assignments.
What's Hazmat's intent here? What do you intend to do to take care of the situation?
We're going to make an entry in level A's and try and determine what the material is, take some sampling, some air monitoring, check out for placards and shipping papers and things like that.
A staging area is a designated location where emergency response equipment and personnel are assigned until they are needed. The staging area should be close enough to the incident scene to significantly reduce response time, yet far enough away to allow units to remain highly mobile for assignment. The area should be clearly identified and should be under the command of a staging officer who logs in arriving units, briefs crews, and assigns them on orders from the incident commander. Back at the incident scene, an early priority is establishing an isolation perimeter in order to limit the number of civilians and emergency response personnel exposed to the hazmat. First, responders should secure the obvious entry points and then establish an isolation perimeter around the hazard.
You begin by controlling intersections, highway ramps, or other access to the scene. But remember, surrounding the area with gridlock vehicles can bring the operation to a grinding halt. Occupants of those gridlock vehicles can become victims if the hazmat migrates into the area. You must have enough personnel to control the perimeter. If not, it's better to completely secure a small area and then expand the perimeter as more resources become available. Police or plant security personnel are good at this job and have the credibility to convince people to move to a safer location. Hazard control zones help ensure that responders do not inadvertently cross into a contaminated area. You may use different terms, but we'll call them the hot, warm, and cold zone. The hot zone is an area immediately surrounding a hazardous materials incident, which extends far enough to prevent adverse effects from the hazardous material. Usually there are dangerous concentrations of the materials in the area that could interfere with an individual's ability to escape, or there are other hazards. The warm zone is an area where decontamination and hot zone support activities take place and includes control points for the access corridor. The cold zone is a safety control zone that contains the command post and other support functions. Initially, these control zones can be estimated based on a combination of visible clues and knowledge of the facility and the hazardous materials involved. But later, a more definitive estimate can be made by the use of air monitoring equipment. The size and configuration of the zones can change during the course of the incident. Maintaining excessively large zones without good technical reasons can create problems for property owners, facility operators, and other agencies. It can also generate political problems. The North American Emergency Response Guidebook provides some basic guidelines concerning the size of the initial isolation zone based on the type of hazardous material. You should give immediate attention to locations within 1,000 feet of the incident, which might be rapidly overtaken by the hazmat. Other areas of concern are high occupancy structures like schools, occupancies with sick, disabled, elderly, or incarcerated persons, and locations that control the flow of traffic into the hazard area. At some incidents, you have to worry about large numbers of people in their homes and in their businesses who are threatened by the hazardous material. You may have to take protective actions, either evacuating the people or protecting them where they are. You may have to take action immediately and then refine the process later during hazard and risk evaluation. A checklist can help you determine what protective actions may be necessary. What is the size and nature of the release? What are the hazards of the material? What are the weather conditions? What type of facility or container is involved in the release? What population is at risk? How can you communicate with the population at risk? And what resources are required to implement the protective action?
Or a bridge or anything down here that we can access. There's a bridge right here that access down here and pick up this bridge right around this area so we can keep all this material that was flowing off of here.
Evacuation is a controlled relocation of the public from the threatened area to a safer location. It's a good option when you have a fire or a hazmat leaking in the building, when explosives or reactive materials are involved, or when a leak cannot be controlled and is expected to keep on leaking. The incident commander must use a systematic, structured approach to clearing the public away from the hazard area. You need to alert people and tell them where to go and what to do. Fixed facilities may have a siren or an alarm system as well as an evacuation plan with pre-designated evacuation routes and assembly areas. Large-scale evacuation can be expensive and pose a threat to health and safety of those being evacuated. A successful evacuation will require the cooperation of a number of agencies. The public may be alerted by door-to-door visits, public address systems, telephone, emergency alerting systems, or commercial broadcast.
Police Department asking all residents in the area to evacuate due to a chemical spill at US 101 in Carrillo.
Well, traveling downtown this afternoon became a tangled mess as cars were rerouted off Highway 101 near the spill. 101 was closed from Chapala to Carrillo streets. At one point, both north and southbound lanes were closed.
If transportation is required, school buses may be a good option. Many evacuees will want to use their own transportation, although this will complicate the traffic situation.
If I was here for another 15 minutes to finish my lunch, or
you should leave.
I should leave.
Relocation facilities will be needed to house and feed displaced people. These locations must have adequate sleeping and feeding areas, restrooms, and security. A person trained in shelter management should be at each shelter. Evacuees must be kept informed about events with regular briefings. In addition, security needs to be provided to prevent looting.
Protecting people in place is another viable tactical option for public protection. You can best protect people in place by directing them inside, preferably airtight buildings, until the danger from the hazardous material is passed. It's not the best option, though, if the building may be threatened by fire or explosion, but it is a good option when the material has been totally released from its container and vapors are dissipating, or when the leak will be of a short duration. It's a good idea when there is not time to evacuate because a fast-moving vapor cloud could easily overrun anyone trying to get away. It's also a good idea when the release can be rapidly controlled at its source, or when dangerous airborne materials are moving quickly toward the people you want to protect. Once you get everyone inside the building, close and lock all the doors and windows, seal any obvious gaps with tape, wet towels, or other materials.
I'll switch.
Turn off HVAC systems close dampers, and turn off and cover exhaust fans. The first step at any hazardous materials incident is to control and manage the site. Begin by establishing command.
Next, you will want to isolate the people from the problem. This means establishing and controlling an isolation perimeter and directing arriving units to a staging area. You will also want to protect response personnel. You can do this by setting up easily recognized hazard control zones, a hot zone, a warm zone, and a cold zone.
Then, if the hazardous material is migrating, you want to take action to either evacuate the threatened population or to protect them in place.
Okay, we've seen how to control and manage the site of a hazardous materials incident. In the next program, we will take a look at how to identify the problem.